Trump has urged Ukraine to accept his plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. He has given Kyiv until Thursday, the American Thanksgiving holiday, to accept the US proposals, which appear to endorse many of Moscow's demands. President Zelensky warned that this was one of the most difficult moments in Ukraine's history. Russia's President Putin has welcomed the plan. Ukraine's allies are to hold talks at the G20 summit of world leaders, which is getting underway in South Africa. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said the discussions would look at creating the space for what he called meaningful peace negotiations.
November 19th, 2025. A document leaked that would send shockwaves through NATO, fracture the transatlantic alliance, and force Ukraine to make an impossible choice. 28 points, a peace plan drafted in secret, and according to military analysts, it contains 0 Russian concessions. This is the story of how a proposed deal to end Europe's bloodiest war since 1945 became the most controversial diplomatic gambit of the decade, how Ukraine's closest ally delivered an ultimatum, and why some historians are calling this the modern-day Munich Agreement. The clock is ticking, the deadline, Thanksgiving Day, and the fate of not just Ukraine, but the entire rules-based international order hangs in the balance. This is the truth behind Trump's 28-point Ukraine peace plan. It started with a breaking news alert from Axios on a Tuesday evening. Trump administration proposes 28-point peace plan for Ukraine. Major territorial concessions required. Within hours, CNN confirmed they had obtained the full draft. The Financial Times published details, and by Wednesday morning, European capitals were scrambling to understand a proposal their governments hadn't been consulted on. The plan wasn't just controversial. According to sources, it had been drafted with input from Kirill Dmitriev, a Putin advisor with deep ties to the Kremlin. Here's what nobody expected. While European allies were kept in the dark, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff had been holding extensive discussions with Russian officials since October. The plan had been circulating between Washington and Moscow for weeks. But when European leaders opened their morning briefings, they learned about it the same way the public did, through news reports. On November 20th, U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll flew to Kyiv. He met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky behind closed doors, and he delivered the document personally. The White House declined official comment. Secretary of State Marco Rubio would only say they were developing ideas. But the Kremlin? They were already celebrating. So what exactly would Ukraine have to give up? The answer? Almost everything. Let's break down the most devastating points. First, territorial surrender. Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk would be recognized as Russian. Not just de facto controlled by Russia, officially recognized. By Ukraine, by the United States, by the international community. This represents roughly 20% of Ukraine's territory, an area the size of Greece, home to millions of people before the war. Second, military cap. Ukraine's armed forces would be reduced from 880,000 troops to just 600,000. That's a 32% cut. A forced demobilization of 280,000 soldiers who've been defending their country for nearly 3 years. For context, Russia maintains over 1.5 million active military personnel. Germany is building an 800,000-strong force by 2029. Ukraine would be required to defend a 1,200-kilometer front line with fewer troops than it has now, while facing an adversary with more than double its military strength. Third, the constitutional ban. Ukraine would have to amend its constitution to explicitly prohibit NATO membership. Not just delay it, not keep it aspirational, remove it entirely. This is the same constitution that was amended in 2019 to commit Ukraine to NATO and EU integration as strategic goals. The very aspiration that represents Ukraine's choice between Russian domination and Western partnership. And what does Russia give up in return? According to the Institute for the Study of War, one of the most credible military analysis organizations tracking this conflict, the answer is nothing. 0 Russian concessions. 0 territorial withdrawals. 0 accountability for 3 years of invasion. The plan, ISW assessed, amounts to Ukraine's full capitulation. But here's the twist no one expected. The real strategic disaster isn't just what Ukraine would lose on paper, it's what they'd lose on the battlefield. To understand why this matters, you need to know about something called the Fortress Belt. Starting in 2014, after Russia's initial invasion of Donbass, Ukraine began building a sophisticated defensive line across Donetsk Oblast. Multi-layered trenches, reinforced bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, artillery positions built into elevated terrain, underground command centers. This wasn't just a front line, it was a fortress system designed to blunt Russian offensives for years. And it worked. For over a decade, Russia has thrown wave after wave of attacks at these positions. They've sacrificed thousands of troops trying to break through, and they've failed. At Russia's current rate of advance, according to ISW's calculations, it would take them several more years of costly combat to capture the fortress belt through military force. But under Trump's plan, Ukraine would simply hand it over. Let that sink in. Russia would gain through a peace deal what it couldn't achieve through 10 years of war. Here's why that's catastrophic. The Fortress Belt protects Ukraine's best defensive terrain. It shields critical logistics hubs like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. It anchors multiple fallback defensive lines. And most importantly, it prevents Russian forces from crossing the Oskil River and threatening Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city. Surrender these positions, and military analysts warn Russia could threaten major Ukrainian cities within 18 to 24 months. Think about that. This isn't peace, it's a timeout before the next invasion. The plan even includes a 10-year limit on security guarantees. 10 years, just enough time for Russia to regenerate its forces, learn from its mistakes, and attack again. This time against a Ukraine with weaker defenses, fewer troops, and no NATO protection. It's not a peace plan. It's a capitulation blueprint with a countdown timer. On November 21st, facing the biggest decision of his presidency, Volodymyr Zelensky addressed his nation. His words were carefully chosen, measured, but unmistakable. Ukraine may face a very difficult choice, either losing its dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Either the difficult 28 points or a very difficult winter, the toughest and further risks. He continued, "A life without freedom, without dignity, without justice. We did not betray Ukraine then. We will not do it now." This wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. Ukraine would not surrender its sovereignty, even under pressure from its most important ally. But Zelensky also said something else, something that revealed the impossible position he's in. We will work on it, because here's the reality. Ukraine depends on US military aid, American weapons, American intelligence, American financial support. Without it, Ukraine's ability to defend itself collapses within months. Trump knows this, and he's using that leverage. The deadline, November 27th, Thanksgiving Day. Accept the plan or risk losing American support entirely. Within hours of his speech, Zelensky was on the phone with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron. He was calling for help, and Europe was listening. According to multiple reports, this plan was drafted with direct input from Kirill Dmitriev, a Putin advisor, someone with deep Kremlin connections. The Institute for the Study of War analyzed all 28 points and found that many clauses aligned perfectly with Moscow's demands from the failed Istanbul talks in March 2022, the same talks that collapsed after the Bucha massacre was exposed. Russia gets everything it's been fighting for. Ukraine loses everything it's been defending, and Putin doesn't have to fire another shot. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, blasted the proposal as a plan that seems to have been written by Russia about Ukraine. Even Republican Senator Lindsey Graham warned, "No plan will work unless Putin and his allies believe that we're serious about more military aid, more capability of Ukraine to hurt Russia militarily, and more economic ruin coming to those who prop up Putin's war machine." But those warnings may come too late, because Sunday, November 24th, US and Ukrainian officials are scheduled to meet in Geneva. Monday, the EU holds a special emergency meeting, and Thursday, Thanksgiving, is the deadline. 3 scenarios could play out over the next few days. Scenario 1. Ukraine accepts the plan. Unlikely. Zelensky has staked his presidency and his country's dignity on resistance. Accepting these terms would be political suicide and national betrayal. Scenario 2. Europe and Ukraine present a counter-proposal. More likely, the Geneva talks could produce a modified framework, one that includes Russian concessions, stronger security guarantees, and protections for Ukraine's defensive positions. But this requires Trump to negotiate, and so far, he's shown no willingness to compromise. Scenario 3. The US cuts aid. Europe tries to fill the gap. This is the nightmare scenario. Germany has pledged to build the strongest conventional army in Europe by 2029, but that's 4 years away. Admiral Cavo Dragone admitted Europe Europe cannot immediately replace American support. Ukraine would face a catastrophic winter offensive from Russia with dwindling ammunition and collapsing defenses. And then there's the bigger question that goes beyond Ukraine. What message does this send to the rest of the world? If Russia can invade a neighbor, be rewarded with territorial gains, and face no consequences, what stops China from taking Taiwan? What stops aggression in the Baltics, in Moldova, in Georgia? The rules-based international order, the principle that borders cannot be changed by force, would be dead. Some historians are already drawing parallels to 1938, when British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich, having forced Czechoslovakia to surrender the Sudetenland to Nazi Germany. He declared, "Peace for our time." 6 months later, Germany invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. 1 year later, World War II began. Appeasement didn't bring peace, it invited more aggression. As this video publishes, the clock is ticking toward Thanksgiving. Ukrainian forces remain in their trenches along the fortress belt. European leaders are meeting in emergency sessions, and Volodymyr Zelensky is preparing for the most consequential week of his presidency. The question facing the world isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's about whether nations have the right to defend their sovereignty, whether alliances mean anything when tested, and whether dignity matters more than expediency in international relations. Zelensky said it best: "We did not betray Ukraine then. We will not do it now. Whatever happens in Geneva, whatever Trump decides, whatever Europe commits to, this moment will define the 21st century's geopolitical order. Will borders be defended, or will they be redrawn by force? We're about to find out." If you want updates as this story develops, hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this with anyone who needs to understand what's really at stake. Because this isn't just about Ukraine, it's about all of us.